Resuming debate?
Resuming debate.
Resuming debate.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Resuming Debate podcast. I'm very pleased to be joined today by my colleague, Member of Parliament, Blake Richards. Just to set up the conversation we're going to have quickly, Blake, we've sort of found each other crossing over on a few files recently, and oftentimes as MPs, we build on each other's work. So I recently put forward Bill C-260, the Care Not Coercion Act. And this bill seeks to deal with situations in which a person is seeking public services. It could be a veteran, it could be a person with disabilities, it could be anyone else really who's seeking unrelated public services, and then has a person in a position of authority over them suggest that instead of accessing those public services, they pursue MAID or medically facilitated death instead. And our view, my view, is that it's not appropriate for people in positions of authority to be proposing facilitated death to those who are accessing other unrelated public services. And we're trying to prevent that from happening with Bill C-260. But this builds on work that Blake has done as our long-running Shadow Minister for Veterans Affairs. So Blake, very grateful to you for laying this critical foundation, and thanks for joining me on Resuming Debate today.
Absolutely. My pleasure to join you. I mean, it's obviously a topic that we wished we didn't have to talk about. We wished it wasn't something that was happening, and we wouldn't need to fix the problem. But sadly, it is. And veterans have been one of the places where it's unfortunately been somewhat prevalent. So, that's we'll have a good conversation about it today. But it is too bad that we have to pursue this, because it'd be a perfect world we wouldn't have to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Blake, before we get into that, though, if you can introduce yourself a little bit to our audience. We have such rapid turnover in the Canadian Parliament for whatever reason that it's not like some other democracies around the world where it's routine for people to be there for a long time. You're one of the very experienced members, first got elected in 2008. Maybe share a bit about your political journey over the last, I guess it's almost 20 years now.
Yeah, probably the best starting place was, politics was kind of something that I was always kind of engaged in right from an early ages. Young, I think I was 14 when I bought my first political membership, which is probably a little unusual. You're probably in that boat too, I suspect. We're the oddballs, I guess.
Yeah.
But I can still remember the referendum, the Charlottetown referendum in 1992. I was 2 weeks from turning 18, and I missed out on the opportunity to vote in that. And I can still remember how upset I was about that. And volunteered over various years on campaigns in different ways throughout the years. And I had a pretty good real estate business that I had built. And back in 2007, when our MP decided not to run again, I had a lot of people encourage me to step forward. And actually, one of the reasons why I decided to do it, it's I had watched, although he was the Prime Minister at that point, I had watched Stephen Harper while he was in opposition, and how he approached that job. And it's very much like what we're seeing from Pierre Poilievre now, where when we can agree on something with the government, even if we don't think it's perfect, we're doing our best to try to make facilitate it happening, try to obviously push them to move quicker, and obviously opposing where we need to oppose things, and of course, just much like what we're going to discuss today, bringing forward good ideas that a government should be and could be bringing forward. And I remember being so impressed with that. And when people started to encourage me to put my name forward, I stepped forward and had a chance to serve, of course, in the last 2/3 or so of the Stephen Harper government. And unfortunately, I've had to endure the last decade or so of Liberal government. And we're hoping, obviously, to have the opportunity to start to turn the country around here. Whenever the next election is, we're hoping that we'll be given that opportunity by Canadians. So that's kind of been my journey. Worked on a number of different files, but it's been a real honor over the last, I guess, almost 4 years now to serve veterans. I'm not a veteran myself. don't really have any significant military history in my family. I mean, I had grandfathers, of course, as most of us do, that served in World War II. But beyond that, not really any significant family military history. And I think quite often in this position, that's the case. But I've always just had a heart for veterans, and I a real appreciation for what the men and women who step forward and put on the uniform for Canada. Just the sacrifices they make, and it's been an honor over the last about 4 years to really work with them and serve them, and seek to do what I can to make improvements for the services and benefits that they receive from the government. Because I'll tell you, it's atrocious in terms of the way our veterans are treated, the length of time they wait for services, and we'll probably talk about some of that as we get into the discussion here, Garnet. But a real honor if I can see some of the things that we're proposing end up being put into action in the next government, and really make a difference in the lives of veterans. So it's been a real honor to do this role over the last 3-4 years. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was trying to remember the timeline, because you've worked in a few different areas. I think by my count, there would be less than 10 members of our caucus that actually served during the Harper years, right? Most of us have been 2015 and later. So you're someone who, in a different sense, you're a veteran, right? You're a veteran of Parliament. But you've been on the veterans file, Shadow Minister for Veterans, since, if I remember right, since would have been 2021 or 2022.
Correct.
And why don't you, I guess, share a bit about your work over those few years? Are there areas where you've said, we were able to push the government to get a change of result, or maybe other areas where you pushed hard and the government just didn't listen? What have been your advocacy priorities and your impact in that period?
Yeah, there is a couple things that we've been able to make them change course on, and I'll get to those. But I think, I've been able to focus my biggest focus in this role has really been to try and identify what are the changes that need to be made. And obviously we're pushing to try and see those changes made by the current government, but obviously building what I'll call a playbook for the things that need to happen to improve things for veterans when we form government. And one of the biggest challenges that veterans face, it is the biggest challenge they face, frankly, is the length of time that they'll wait to get services. So the challenge that many veterans face, they leave the military. It's a big change, especially if they've joined at 18 or somewhere in that ballpark. It's a very different life than anything in the civilian world, right? Everything is kind of laid out for you in terms of exactly what your day is going to look like, right down to when you'll eat, when you'll go for a medical appointment. All of these things are just very different than they are in the civilian world. And so when you leave the military, that's always one of the first challenges is kind of getting all those things in place for yourself. And there really isn't much that's done for them. And when they make their applications for the various things, there's education benefits that are available to them, obviously retraining or things like that, that they might need. When they apply for these things, it can actually take, it's not even weeks or months. It's often measured in years, the amount of time it takes for them to get these things in place. And so you can imagine, someone, especially these days, a veteran is more typically in their 30s or 40s now than in the past. So they've got a family to take care of, and a wife at home and things like that, or a husband in some cases, and what happens is they start to really struggle because they can't get these educational benefits in place, and it's hard to find a job as a result. And there may not even be any income because the income supports that are supposed to be there for that time, they're still waiting for that to be adjudicated too. And so what ends up happening way too often, unfortunately, is that pressure of not being able to support the family and things like that. It leads to things like alcoholism and drug abuse, and it can unfortunately end a lot of marriages. And it could send a lot of veterans down a really dark path, and it doesn't have to be that way if we could just get their benefits in place. And so we've got a number of different ideas on ways we can do that. What we're saying is if we can't meet the service standard that Veterans Affairs sets for itself, which is 16 weeks, which is still too long in my opinion, but then essentially the applications would automatically be approved.
Yeah.
And you know what, I guess when you think about that, it's kind of sad the way veterans applications are treated. If you think about all of us as Canadians when we do our taxes, for example, essentially what the government's doing is assuming that we're telling the truth, right? They assess based on what the taxpayers provide. They might audit some people, of course, but essentially they're assessing it based on what the information that's been provided by the taxpayer. In the case of a veteran, it's the exact opposite. They assume every veteran is lying to them. They must prove everything, right down to there's veterans who are missing limbs who have to every year send in paperwork to indicate that they're still missing their limb. Last I know, limbs aren't growing back. Or
Yeah.
veterans who are paralyzed in a wheelchair, they've got to send in paperwork every year to prove they're still in a wheelchair. Things like that. It's absolutely insane. And what happens is a lot of veterans, they end up giving up because it just becomes too much to fight through all of the bureaucracy and paperwork and even finding a doctor, family doctor, hard enough for most Canadians. But what happens is for veterans, because of the amount of paperwork involved in dealing with Veterans Affairs, and doctors have to fill it all out, many doctors don't want to take on veterans, sadly. And so even finding a doctor to be able to, do the rest of the paperwork that's required can be really challenging. So that's one of the things we have to fix. And then, of course, we've been dealing with, when we'll get into this, I won't get into in detail now, but the medical assistance in dying, that's part of the challenge here. Like veterans, they get pushed down this bad path. And then now you've got Veterans Affairs workers that are saying, well, if it's so hard to live your life, perhaps we could help you end it. Which is the last thing that should ever be happening, obviously. So we've been, and then, if I wanted get in quickly into a couple of things we've been able to get the government to reverse course on. A couple of those things, you might remember over the last couple of Remembrance Days, there was this ban on prayer by the chaplains that was put forward by the government, and we were able to get them to at least temporarily reprieve on both occasions with that. I think hopefully we've been able to put a stop to that in terms of the Remembrance Day services, at least anyway, in terms of not allowing prayer. And that's something that's really important to a lot of our veterans, that they they have that's one of the freedoms they fought for, frankly, is the religion, right? So and then also there was an attempt this past year to not send through a program that essentially they're distributed through MPs, but they're free wreaths distributed to all the legions across the country for their Remembrance Day services by the government. And they tried to put a stop to that. I guess that was one of their, despite a $78 billion a year deficit there, I guess they were trying to find some small cost savings by not having a wreaths for Remembrance Day services, which is ludicrous. Yeah. We were able to put a stop.
It's always wild the cost cutting measures they do come up with. By the way, like the massive waste that we see, and then on the other hand, they just find these things that actually are very relevant to people's lives that they want to cut. I think, Blake, it's really helpful that you provide this context about the kind of red tape that veterans are dealing with, because it. For those who have just heard the stories about people having made proposed to them, but don't necessarily know the full context of the life of veterans, what you're painting a picture of is this dynamic of like constantly needing to go back to Veterans Affairs Canada for basic things, to prove things you've already proved, to get things you're entitled to. But it's basically a situation where folks are drowning in red tape, and they're being constantly pushed back in this position of vulnerability, where they're always engaging with Veterans Affairs Canada to try to prove things, to ask for things, to clarify things. So it's a real position of, unfortunately, of drowning in red tape and of a kind of vulnerability to people in those positions of authority. Is that a good description of that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. What the term that's often used to describe what's happening to our veterans is institutional betrayal and sanctuary trauma. And essentially, that's where the very person who's supposed to be there to help you, or the institution in this case, is causing more damage. We hear this all the time from veterans. Like the biggest contributor in many cases to their mental health challenges is actually dealing with Veterans Affairs itself, or dealing with the government. Like the challenges that come with that, many of them just give up entirely. And I think probably the best way that I could highlight this would to really help people understand it would be to give you a couple of the examples where MAID has been offered to veterans and what led to it, right? So one of the first cases that we saw come out about this was a woman named Christine Gauthier. Christine, she had a back injury from her service. She was a former Paralympian as well for Canada, like a very accomplished woman. And her challenge was that she needed her home, the way her home was, she needed a wheelchair lift to get up to the second level. And essentially, without that wheelchair lift, she described this to our Veterans Affairs Committee, what she had to do as a result of not having a lift. Essentially, what she would have to do is she'd have to get herself out of her chair, drag herself down some stairs, and then across a gravel driveway to get out to her vehicle. That's what she was essentially doing, dragging herself along the gravel driveway to get to her vehicle because she didn't have this lift. And so she'd been fighting for years with Veterans Affairs to get this lift. And eventually what happened was she actually had it happen to her on two different occasions, where a Veterans Affairs worker said to her, well, look, if it's so hard to live your life, this is the actual exact words, if it's so hard to live your life, we could offer you medical assistance in dying. And like, all she wanted was a wheelchair lift so she could have a little easier time to get out and do her shopping and things like that. Like, not a unreasonable request. I mean, we have to remember these men and women that we're talking about, they served our country. They were willing to put their lives on the line. They risked literally life and limb. And in some cases, have actually, ended up in a wheelchair, as Christine did, have lost limbs, things like that. And I think the least we can do as a country is to ensure we care for them with whatever they need to live their life with those injuries. And that's not what happened in this case. I'll give you another example just to kind of give you a sense of this. Actually, I got a couple other ones I wanted to share. There's a fellow in Newfoundland who I talked to, and I won't name names in these other couple of cases because they haven't come forward. And one of the reasons it's such a struggle for veterans to be able to do that is that they're afraid of the repercussions from Veterans Affairs. Like, that's the kind of fear there is amongst veterans of this organization. He had pretty severe PTSD, but he managed to build up a pretty good business for himself. And he just needed some supports at home to be able to make sure that on those rough days, he could get through them. And there's an assessment process that veterans go through where they have to be determined to be 100% disabled in order to receive some of these services that are available to them. He was assessed at 99, I think it was 98 or 99%. So he had asked for a reassessment, when you're that close to being assessed at that level, to get the services he needed.
What does that even mean, incident? That just seems like such a bizarre.
It is.
You're not 100% disabled, but you're 99% disabled. What do you do with the 1% though?
Yeah. It's a very bizarre system. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, I'm not even going to try to explain it because it just doesn't make any sense. But that's the way they do this. And that's a whole series of questions they go through to determine whether they're 100% or whether they're less than 100%. And I mean, come on, like you say, right? 98, 99% versus 100. Like, this is a guy who, he was running a successful business, but he had days where he'd just be debilitated completely, couldn't even get out of bed. I would say that this is probably someone that needs a few services to help them with that situation, clearly. But he had to have this 100% assessment. And then so he was looking for a reassessment. And it was in the process of that they actually said to him, I remember him telling me, he said, they offered him maid, and he didn't know what maid was. He actually thought that meant someone to come clean his home, which is what it was actually the kind of thing he was looking for. So he was pretty happy. And then when they explained that they were actually offering to help him, end his life, he just, like, you can imagine what it did to him, right? Like someone who has these kinds of days where he can't even get out of bed, like that put him into a real spiral and sanctuary trauma. And then the third one I'll mention to you, Garnet, is this one happened just last fall. I think it was September, October of last year. This actually gives you a real picture of how bad things are in terms of the weight that veterans face to get, and the fight they face to get the benefits they deserve. This woman, she was left the military in 2015, and she still hasn't had her benefits and services that she needs. Like, she's got things like hearing loss, for example. So she needs hearing aids, I guess, is what it is. There's a few other things, but that's one example. It's a very common one for veterans. Hearing loss, you can imagine they're around some pretty loud noises constantly. That's a very common injury, and one that I can't believe it takes years for someone to be able to, determine. But she's been since 2015 fighting for the benefits that she is entitled to as a veteran. Like, think about that. That's over a decade she's been fighting. And finally, they essentially tell her she's too difficult. Well, she's difficult because she's insisting on what she has the right to as a veteran.
Yeah.
And anyway, she also, I should mention, one of the things that she suffers from injuries, she had military sexual trauma as well, which is unfortunately too common in the military. She had a caseworker on the phone last fall, and she was discussing various injuries, but definitely the medical, the military sexual trauma. And she was told by this Veterans Affairs worker that, well, she maybe should have kept her legs closed. That was the first thing that was said to her. Then she was offered psychedelics. And then when she insisted that she wanted to work with a different psychologist than they were trying to have her work with, they then said, well, we could offer you medical assistance in dying, and we would pay your family $300,000 if you did it. This is the kind of thing that's happening to veterans. So it's not just, that they're waiting years. It's not just that they're having to fight and claw to get things that they're entitled to, but then at the end of that whole process, like, we're talking 10 years in for this woman. And then she's offered, well, listen, if you don't want to fight with us anymore, we could just offer you medical assistance dying. We'll pay your family out. Like, this is the kind of thing that's happening, and it is just disgusting.
Yeah, it's horrifying that these things are happening. Blake, part of the political discussion, and I initially saw the exchanges you were having with ministers in question period about this, and you just did a great job bringing attention to these terrible situations. The government's line was to portray these as kind of lone wolf events, right? That maybe there was one person, maybe that one person had talked to multiple veterans, but there was basically one person that was doing this kind of on their own initiative. And you and others have made the case that this is more widespread, and in fact, that in addition to the cases that we know about, there are many cases of people that are talking to other veterans but have not come forward publicly because of, as you mentioned, fear of reprisal from the department. They're so dependent on the Veterans Affairs Department, as you described. So how would you answer those that say, these are terrible cases, but maybe they are isolated cases as opposed to part of a broader pattern?
It's a really important question, because that is the claim that the government continues to make even to this day, that there was one person who they let go, who had dealt with 4 different veterans and offered this. That's still the claim they make to this day. But I don't know how that can be possible. For starters, one of the things that happens with veterans is they're assigned a caseworker based on the province they live in. I've spoken to veterans personally, and I've heard from others secondhand, um, in almost every province in this country, for starters.
Hmm.
Secondly, I've heard of both men and women who have offered this, in terms of caseworkers who have offered this. So it can't be one person, obviously, and
Hmm.
even in that scenario. I've personally spoken to probably 15 or more veterans who have had this happen to them.
Wow.
I've heard from other veterans who work with their fellow veterans of other people as well. And what we seem to have happening now is there's this pattern. And, I mentioned the one case that I spoke about just now, that she had this happen to her last fall, like in September or October of 2025. The government claims well, they claim this ended when they fired the person that they claim was the only one doing this back in 2022. So clearly, this is not something that's persisted well beyond that. And it's far more than 4 veterans who've had it. I've had veterans tell me about attending the funeral of someone who accepted the MAID
Hmm.
program from Veterans Affairs, for example. We did an OPQ. I'm sure listeners to your show will be familiar with what an OPQ is, order paper question in the House of Commons last year, where we uncovered that there.
And for those that aren't, it's basically just an order for information. Members of Parliament have this power to order the government to provide information publicly. So go ahead. Yeah. So you're requesting information about these cases. Yeah.
And so what we discovered there is that there has been some lawsuits as a result of this that have come forward, including one that was settled. Of course, there's a non-disclosure agreement, so we don't know anything about it. But we do know, we've heard from other veterans that they were being offered payments of $300,000 to their families if they accept it. So, I mean, there is all kinds of clear evidence that this is not an isolated situation to one worker. It's far more than 4 times this has happened, and it continues to happen to this day, which is exactly why your bill is so needed, Garnet. It is such a breath of fresh air that you've brought that forward, and it would make a huge difference in the lives of many people, but veterans are obviously the one that I'm the most concerned with, because I deal with it every single day. And it breaks my heart every time I have to hear one of these examples. And like you said, I know people are probably thinking, well, why don't they just come forward and talk about this? Well, I mean, they face repercussions. There's been veterans who have had their benefits or their pensions or things like that threatened as a result of speaking out. And so veterans are afraid to do that. And that's a sad situation when someone who served our country is afraid to speak out about what's happening to them because they might have what they're entitled to taken away from them. It's exactly why your bill is so needed, Garnet.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll go to the provisions of the bill next. I want to just ask, building on one thing you said, you shared a story of a gentleman who it was really traumatic for him to receive this proposal, this offer. Could you talk a bit more about how the option being put on the table causes harm? Because I think some people might say, well, if you don't want it, just say no, right? And then move on. But the reality is, when you're in a vulnerable situation, and in a way looking for support, affirmation, to probably looking for to be recognized as a human being in some ways, even in those interactions, that these proposals have an impact on you. Maybe you can share a bit about how that plays out.
Absolutely. And I think I'll go back to that term I used earlier, sanctuary trauma. So, what happens here is this is the place that these people are supposed to go to for the help that they are entitled to, right? So they're going there, and, they're, in many cases, like in that case that you mentioned included, this veteran had attempted suicide in the past. And many of these veterans tell me that one of the biggest contributing factors when they get to that state, whether they're just thinking about it or whether they've attempted it, it is actually how difficult it is to deal with the government, to deal with Veterans Affairs, to get the benefits. I wished I was exaggerating, but we've actually had veterans, even in the committee in the House of Commons, tell us that, like, the biggest challenge with my mental health is when I have to pick up the phone and call Veterans Affairs. Like, so that is the sort of the state they're in. Like they feel like they have nowhere left to turn, right? And they've been driven to that spot by the very institution that's supposed to be there to help them. So that's the vulnerable state that they're in. And then to say, well, look, if if you're finding this so difficult to deal with us, we could just offer you this, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds real simple to say, yeah, say no if you don't want it. But the problem is that they've been driven into a state where they might already be having thoughts about ending their life, but that's not really what they want to do. They just want help to live it. And so when it comes to the point where that's the help that's being offered to you, so-called help, um, that puts. I mean, I mentioned the case of the fellow in Newfoundland who, like, it literally sent him in a major spiral, and he couldn't get out of bed for weeks after this happened to him. Like, that's the kind of situation. I think he had a very successful business. He lost his business as a result of this offer being made to him. Like, that's the kind of thing this is doing.
Yeah.
It's just it's not as simple as as a yes or no. It's
Yeah.
it's a veteran in a very vulnerable state because they've been put in that position after years of fighting with their government. Like, they go overseas to fight for this country. The last thing they expect is to have to come back and fight with their own government.
Yeah, absolutely. So you and I started this conversation in this parliament because as people may know, there's a random draw for who can bring forward private members' bills, and I got a pretty good draw this time. So was thinking right away about how I can engage, in a positive way on changes to legislation, and there are different tools we have that we can use private members bills for, others that are harder to use that channel for. So we started talking a bit about this, about introducing into the criminal code an idea of basically cases where it's inappropriate and shouldn't be allowed for somebody to propose the conversation around medically facilitated death. And we spent a lot of time on this, and I'm not gonna talk about all the different aspects of the internal process, but I think it's good for people to
We've got
know
our
that.
own PTSD from all the process.
But I think it is good for people to know that we have a good process internally of uh, studying ideas, challenging each other, looking at it from every angle, getting buy-in, and it's a good process because as an individual member of parliament, I do have a right to put forward a bill on any subject I want, but we get to a better result, and a result that has strong buy-in and is more likely to go forward as we go through that discussion process. And within our caucus, again, it's not going to be a surprise to anyone. There are different perspectives on the sort of fundamental issues around medically facilitated death. We've had free votes on them at every stage. There are different points of view, but I think we've been able to forge a really strong consensus around the core aspect of this bill, which is saying that people who are bureaucrats, right? People who are not actually providing medical care, who have someone coming to them seeking unrelated public services, and them suggesting medically facilitated death. That is totally inappropriate. And of course, the conduct of regulated professionals, doctors and nurses, that could be regulated through their professions. It can be regulated at the provincial level, but we're talking about people that aren't part of regulated professions, which not in every case, but in many cases, which means that that the criminal code is the only tool available for regulating their actions. So this bill would apply not just to Veterans Affairs Canada employees, but it would apply to these Veterans Affairs Canada caseworkers and others, to say that you are not allowed to be proposing aid to people. So thank you for working with me on this process, Blake. And if you want to share a bit about kind of your thoughts on the provisions of Bill C-260 and how it would impact the situations you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, no matter what one's thoughts are on MAID, I think one thing we can all agree on is that this is supposed to be a conversation that happens between, your medical professional, your doctor, and the patient, and the options presented to them, right? Like that is, we can all agree that outside of that context, that an offer like what we're discussing today is completely inappropriate. Like, I think that's something we can all agree on. And I think when you think about the kinds of examples I've given you, right, like these are people who they're clearly asking for other types of help. They're not talking about wanting to end their life. They're talking about asking for help, a wheelchair lift, some home care services, hearing hearing loss, like a hearing aid. Like these are the kinds of things they were seeking, right? And to be offered instead the idea that you could end your life, like just because they're frustrated with the bureaucracy they're having to deal with, right? And I'll take you back as well, right, to 2022 when the government said, okay, we've put a stop to this. This Veterans Affairs will never happen again in Veterans Affairs. It was isolated to this one individual. But that's clearly not been the case. And we're the types of examples that I'm hearing from veterans. They're even going so far as to, and I don't understand how they're able to offer this, but saying that they'll offer a payment to their family of $300,000. I've heard this a few times. Like,
Yeah, and
that's the kind of thing that needs to be put to a stop, right? Like that
yeah,
is, like, I think everyone can agree that that is not
yeah,
appropriate in any kind of way for that to be happening, right?
yeah. Have you dug into this $300,000 payment specifically? By the way, do you have a sense of because they're so if a veteran dies, what is available to their family? Are they describing a kind of family benefit that would be available regardless of how the person died, or is there something? Because that's it's a really really troubling concept that there's an implied sort of financial benefit to
Yeah.
somebody ending their life.
And my assumption is that what we're talking about are some kind of a benefit through their pension that's available to the family when their life ends. That's
Hmm.
my assumption as to what we're talking about there. I really haven't been able to fully dig into that, but that's my assumption. And obviously, unfortunately, none of these veterans, like, of course, when something like that happens, you're in such shock, and they kind of recoil, and like,
Yeah.
in many cases they've hung up the phone or things like that, and then of course it's all denied later on, right?
Yeah.
So
But are
I've
these calls
never had
recorded?
the
Are you,
mind to really dig into, like, okay, what does this actually look like?
yeah.
What are you offering to pay my family for? Like, so we don't really know, but I mean, the idea that it was even mentioned, is you know uh, put aside that I'm certain it's likely something that's available to any veteran who passes away. uh,
Yeah.
that it's mentioned in that kind of a context is
Yeah.
completely, like, that's just, it's the kind of thing that your bill needs to protect people from, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Just in passing, I mean, these calls are recorded, I assume, but also just because they're recorded doesn't mean they're going to be shared. Committees can try to access certain information, but the government will use the excuse personal information, even if maybe the veteran wants the information to be turned over. So it would be. I guess it's in spite of the recording potential, it's still very hard to get to track these things down.
Yeah, we certainly have tried to do that. I mean, there's a claim that not all the calls are recorded. I don't believe it personally, but there is a claim
Okay.
the case. And of course, in every case that someone has pursued this, it's been completely denied, right? That
Hmm.
that it even happened, or that there's a recording or any of that. Like, it's um, again, it's kind of exactly why your bill is so important, because this is asking essentially uh, the perpetrator to sort of investigate themselves, right?
Yeah.
That's essentially what's happening, and so the only way to deal with it, of course, is to have some kind of an outside mechanism to do that, and that's what your bill is proposing, right?
Yeah. So my bill proposes the use of the criminal code for this, um, and that mechanically what that does is it brings the police into it. So if something like this happens, then a person can make a complaint to the police, and the police can investigate and use all of their powers in the process. I think that mechanism is very important, because even if you have a policy of government saying that this shouldn't happen, that policy is still then triggers an internal investigation. It triggers an internal process, and we need to do better than just an internal process. We need the ability of people that are affected by this to be able to go to police, the police to be able to then investigate and pursue the issue fully as an outside body with the powers and the mandate to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely, Garnet. Like it's, I think we've demonstrated here in this conversation exactly why that's so necessary, right? There was an internal investigation 4 or 5 years ago, 4 years ago, into what was happening at Veterans Affairs, and they concluded, as we've already talked about, that it was an isolated incident of one person offering this to, I think it was 4 different veterans. We clearly can see that's not the case, and yet, you know there seems to be no repercussions for the fact that it continues to happen. And so it's exactly why relying on an internal investigation isn't enough. It's that simple.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Blake, thank you for your support for this bill and your work on this issue for many, many years. I wanted to ask you, just kind of linking this to an earlier part of the conversation, the challenges veterans are experiencing in general, and that increasing division between kind of the norms of military life and the norms of civilian life. For people that are listening to this podcast, and aside from policy advocacy, please advocate for C260 and some of the other things you're supporting. But aside from policy advocacy, what can people, everyday people who don't have a background in the military, do to connect with, to reach out to veterans in their community? In the absence of good support from Veterans Affairs Canada, there may be things people can do for veterans in their own communities, their own neighborhoods, to try to bridge some of these issues.
Well, I mean, it can start with things as simple as, like, one of the struggles that for veterans is, like, the appreciation that there is shown to them, right? And I mean, I think we do a terrible job of that in Canada, and it's not just our government; it's all of us as Canadians, right? And I'm always heartened when I see examples of that, where there is appreciation shown. But, like, it's as simple as, you see a veteran's license plate at the gas station, walk up and thank them for their service, right? Like, they don't hear it enough. I know when I thank veterans for their service, they're almost shocked to be thanked. So it can be that simple, but I think beyond that, like, I've described how difficult it is for veterans to get the services they need from their government. And so there are a lot of great organizations that have stepped forward to try and fill the gap on that. Whether it's, your local Legion, they have service officers there who help veterans to navigate Veterans Affairs. So whether it's supporting the Legion, like buying a membership at the Legion and supporting the Legion, or whether it's other organizations, like there are many great ones out there that do wonderful work to provide service dogs for veterans, to provide retreats where they can get mental health help. There are a lot of those out there. If certainly I welcome anyone to reach out to me. I can give them many good examples, or if you can Google these things. They're in every part of the country, where they're essentially filling the gaps where the government's failing. You can support those organizations with whether it be with your time or with your money. Those are a couple of things that I think come to mind for me. Would be that, just to just support those organizations that are helping to fill the gaps.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. I think supporting those organizations, and then also just the simple expression of gratitude, like a thank you for your service.
Yeah. Actually,
having that.
one other
Yeah.
example I should have given as well is there are many veteran-owned businesses out there. It's actually something that I think is being really encouraged amongst the veteran community themselves. There's some people doing some really good work to encourage and help their fellow veterans get into. I try to do that myself. Support a veteran-owned business, and there are websites out there that list veteran-owned businesses. And so, do that when you can. A lot of veteran small businesses out there that they can support as well. So that's another example.
Okay. Excellent. Blake, just in the time we have left, I want to touch base on one other topic that we've been working together on recently, and that is, you're someone who takes on all these heavy, heart-rending topics in our parliament, and it's so appreciated. You've also been a champion of families that are facing infant and child loss. And there's a private member's bill now. It's a Liberal private member's bill that we're supporting, C222. I've interacted with it as the kind of shadow minister responsible for it because it relates to leave and employment, so it falls under my purview. But you were way ahead of this issue, I think, a decade ago, working on it. If you can just share a little bit as kind of an additional topic. On the issue of families going through the loss of a child, and what kind of policies from government need to change to support families in that situation.
Yeah, this was an issue that was kind of brought to my attention shortly after the 2015 election. A constituent of mine, by the name of Sarah Cormier, her and her husband Lee, they lost their daughter Quinn to a SIDS death. And they literally received a phone call a couple of days later from a Service Canada agent telling them that your daughter ceases to exist, therefore your benefits cease to exist. That was the words that were used. And this was in relation to their benefits through the EI program. And so what actually happened, Lee is a heavy equipment operator. He was, because of their financial situation, forced to go back to work. That was like a couple of days after their daughter passed away. He was in no condition to be running heavy equipment. And his boss thankfully recognized that and offered him some paid time off to be able to deal with obviously the loss of their daughter. And unfortunately, that's not always going to be the case, that you're going to have a compassionate boss that's going to recognize what you're dealing with and be able to do that. And so, to have the government tell you that they're going to cut benefits off immediately before you've even had the chance to bury your lost child. So that's what I've been fighting to see happen for, almost a decade now. And had resistance every step of the way, unfortunately, from the Liberal government. So I'm really thrilled to see that there is a Liberal member who has stepped forward and finally recognized this. And I'm really hopeful that, obviously, with our support, we'll finally see this get done. But we've had 10 years of people who've had to suffer the same kinds of sad situations as Sarah and Lee Cormier faced after the loss of their daughter, as a result of just. I still to this day can't understand how anyone could hear that story and not want to fix it. But thrilled that we look like we're headed towards finally being able to do that, and that's going to make a huge difference. Like, any of us who are parents don't even want to imagine the grief that you would face in that scenario. And I think the idea that the government would add to that grief and heartache with this kind of bureaucratic nonsense is something that no one should be willing to accept, right?
Yeah. So that bill has been adopted unanimously at second reading. It's now before committee, and as you say, would have been better if we had dealt with this a decade ago or earlier. But we're here now, and we're going to be hearing at the Human Resources Committee from some of the groups representing families in this situation. We're trying to amend the bill to expand it slightly as well, because There are also some situations in which a parent passes away, in which also the leave is cut off. Similar situation where a parent is on leave because of an entitlement they have to EI parental leave, but then that parent passes away, so they could they will lose the benefits right away because the person receiving that leave is no longer alive. So Blake, you're taking on these issues where the 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 raw pain of life sometimes comes up against a really cold and uncompassionate bureaucracy, and trying to make the government a little bit more human in its response to people in moments of tragedy, in moments where they have different needs, and so thanks for taking on these different, really important issues, and thanks for taking the time to chat with me about them.
Absolutely, and I mean that at the end of the day, that to me is as difficult as it can be to deal with some of these issues. The there's a lot of things that we need to change in this country, but the nameless, faceless bureaucracy that puts people through these kinds of situations is one of the top of the list that we need to deal with. And these are a couple examples of how we can do that, right? And it's just one of those things. You can't hear the kinds of stories that you and I have heard and not want to do something to fix it. And we're fortunate. We've been entrusted with this responsibility by our fellow citizens, where we get the opportunity to actually do those work on those kinds of changes. And it would be a waste of our opportunity if we didn't dig in on behalf of people who who are suffering and need our help, right?
Yeah. So we started talking about your story. You've been here for 18 years. Lot of sacrifices, lot of air miles, a lot of time in airports traveling back and forth. But I would imagine that that these kinds of human stories and the ability to be involved in them is a powerful motivator for you to keep
Yeah.
going, keep making those sacrifices, and stay in it.
Yeah, absolutely, Garnet. It's I'm 51 now. I started I think I was 32 or 33. I can tell you that the amount of miles put on in the air, it's starting to have a toll on the body for sure. But it makes it pretty easy to keep going when you have things like your bill, the bill for the pregnancy and infant loss, and of course so many other things that we need to be fighting for. It's an honor to do this job. It really is. And to be able to accomplish things that will make a massive difference in many people's lives. We're fortunate to be able to have this opportunity to do this job, to have been entrusted with this responsibility. And, it does come with some time away from your family and a lot of other sacrifices, but man, I'll tell you, I wouldn't change this opportunity for the world, because I know we've been able to make a difference. And I just pray that we'll have the opportunity to form the next government, and we'll be able to do even more to make changes that are needed in this country. And that's what keeps me going every day, is that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So we hope for the day, as two conservative MPs here, hope for the day soon when we form government. But in the meantime, trying to get important things done in this Parliament. To underline again, those bills are C-260. That's my bill on care not coercion, Bill C-260. And then Bill C-222 is the Liberal private members bill that we are supporting, trying to help families in a situation of the loss of a child. And we're trying to amend that to expand it to also support families in the case of a death of a parent. Those bills are C-260 and C-222. So one thing that you can do today, listening to this podcast, if you've been moved, inspired by this conversation, please reach out to your local member of Parliament and share with them about those bills and encourage them to support the important work we're doing on them. And both of these grow out of work that was started and brought to Parliament by Blake, my guest here. So Blake, thanks so much for joining us today, and yeah, keep up the good work.
Well, and you as well, Garnet. It takes all of us to make this happen, and we're going to make it happen, and
Yeah.
we many Canadians will be better for it. So.
Yeah. Okay, that is the Resuming Debate podcast. We publish about every 2 weeks. So we'll be back with another episode in 14 days. Looking forward to your feedback, your suggestions. Please like, share, subscribe, and share this episode so that more people will get this information about these important bills we're working on. Again, we'll see you back with another episode in 2 weeks.